Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
State Representative McGuire, of Kenosha, is a Democrat seeking re-election in the 64th Assembly District. Tip, excuse me for biffing your last name. I can pronounce it. It's McGuire, but thanks for joining WisconsinEye. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, and not a problem, Steve.
Well, you're a former assistant district attorney in Milwaukee County.
Yes, and before that, I was actually a special prosecutor here in Kenosha as well.
Thanks for clarifying. Yeah. Your hometown made national and international news a few months ago for all the wrong reasons in the debate over policing reform. So I guess the speaker's going to have a task force. The governor's got 9 bills. Senator Van Wangaard's got 7 or 8 bills. What policing reforms, drawing on your experience, are you convinced needs to be enacted?
Well, I'll say this, as a former prosecutor, as you mentioned, I had the opportunity to work with police officers every single day. And I have a lot of faith in the professionalism and commitment of our officers. These are people who chose public service. And so we should be grateful for that. And I have friends and family members who are police officers, and I'm concerned for their safety every day. But that said, it's clear, I think everyone agrees that there are some things that should be done. I think it starts with transparency. That's the first place I would go. Last session, Representative Neubauer and I circulated a bill that would help cities, municipalities either upgrade or buy body camera technology for their community. I think that's a major problem, is that many municipalities, including Kenosha, don't have body camera technology currently because it's difficult to afford to be able to put all that in on the front end. And then furthermore, later on, every year it seems we get new technology and upgrades in technology that can make it easier for us to be able to ensure that these cameras are on and that they're recording what they need to be recording. And so allowing municipalities the opportunity to upgrade that technology, I think, would be a big deal as well.
Okay. Some of the protesters nationally have said that there is, their term, systemic racism in America's large police departments. As someone who, in your former job, worked with police officers, is that an unfair statement, sir?
I wouldn't say that it's unfair. I think sometimes when we talk about these issues, people seem to talk past each other. When we talk about systemic racism, we mean that there are laws that have been, unfairly targeted towards people of color and communities of color in the past. One of the things my former boss, DA John Chisholm, they noted when they were collecting data on this that drug paraphernalia charges were often almost exclusively levied towards people of color, and that was a law that frequently would impact communities of color rather than other communities. And so when we're looking at this, we don't mean to identify individuals or say people are acting necessarily in an overtly racist manner or anything like that. It's simply that there are factors that within a system that's been built up over time that disproportionately affect communities of color. And so we should be looking at ways to solve those disparities. Okay,
let's talk about the pandemic that's upended every part of Wisconsin. You support both the governor's mask and 25% occupancy orders?
Well, we'll take them one at a time. So with the mask order, I support that 100%. I think that is such a common sense measure to reduce the risk of transmission. It certainly is a simple and easy way for us to slow the spread of COVID-19. And it's, frankly, it is so painless for us to be able to do that to help make sure that others in our community are being safe. As we have more information about the disease, it seems that masks become more important in helping slow the spread. And so it is a very common sense thing. In regard to the 25% occupancy, I want to start off by saying I work very closely with the small business community here in Kenosha. And I know many of them have been really struggling this year. Obviously, we need to continue to support them as the 25% it appears for now is going to remain in place. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them through this difficult time, because I know many of them, especially here in Kenosha, have been hit repeatedly, by COVID-19, as well as the civil unrest that really harmed a lot of small businesses downtown and set them back quite a bit. We need to make sure that we're providing them with every bit of support. And so I'm in regular communication with my local chamber, as well as with local restaurant groups and local bars and taverns, to make sure that they're able to get the resources that they need to succeed. I think it may be necessary to slow the spread of COVID-19 for us to be able to cap the amount of occupancy. I know that it is based on a broader metric than many people assumed when it first came out. And so many of the businesses I've been speaking to have said this is actually something that is feasible for them to be able to succeed with. But we do need to be listening to our restaurants and our taverns as they tell us what they need in order to make sure that they can succeed in this difficult time.
What's your position on the Rep. Bourne and the Senator capping a bill, which says if you're a charity, business, organization, and you follow COVID-19 protocols, you could not be sued over COVID-19. Could you vote for that?
So I think the bill is a little bit more complicated than that. One of the things that I think about when I consider bills like that is the devil is always in the details. And one of the distinctions that they make is between reckless and negligence, reckless behavior and negligence. So to use sort of an analogy, the difference between being somebody who drives 40 miles above the speed limit or somebody who doesn't pay attention to the road. Right? Driving 40 miles above the speed limit is reckless behavior, but negligent behavior is not doing that which I'm required to do as a driver, right? And so I get concerned about providing immunity to people who are negligent, especially when so many of our small businesses have invested in making sure that they aren't negligent, that they are protecting their workers and they're protecting their customers, and they're protecting their clients. And so many of them have done that. And then if you have somebody who refuses to do that which they're supposed to do, why would we be protecting them? It seems like it only would encourage bad actors. And I'm especially concerned with that in regard to places like nursing homes, where a small bit of negligence can have a huge, catastrophic, fatal outcome for many people. So I'm a little cautious about that bill. I recognize that there's a great deal that we have to do to help our businesses through this difficult time, but I'm a little bit concerned about some of the narrow distinctions that are created within that bill.
The frontline role being played by hospitals, of course, in Wisconsin and across the nation. If you're reelected voting on the next state budget, do hospitals deserve an even greater financial priority than they may have in the current budget?
Absolutely. I think our hospitals have done an admirable job in trying to keep us all safe and keep us all healthy, Steve. And that, as we move forward and we're crafting next year's budget, there are some issues that hospitals have struggled with in the past, and including reimbursement rates and things like that have put them in a difficult position to begin with. And so I think we're absolutely going to need to be able to help them out and do what we can to make sure that they succeed.
You just mentioned the next state budget. The Federal Reserve said in the second quarter, Wisconsin's GDP shrunk by 8%. I'll make up a number, if we're $1 billion short in tax collections in the current budget year, how would you fill that shortfall?
So I think a lot of this is going to depend on how the federal government behaves in the next few months. Certainly during previous tremendous shocks to our budget and our economy, the federal government has proven useful in helping us close those gaps. So it'll be very interesting to see how they're willing to help us along the way. I would also note that the Fiscal Bureau's analysis shows that this hasn't been as detrimental to our budget as we sort of had expected. So that's also good news. But I think that there are things that we left on the table in the past that certainly can be employed to help us close those gaps. I'm thinking of the Medicaid expansion in particular, where the state could be bringing dollars in that we've been sending to the feds for years. We could be bringing that money in to help close our gaps here in Wisconsin.
Okay. Are you a supporter of the governor's Fair Maps Commission to draw the next congressional and legislative district lines? If so, why?
Yes, I am. I think it's important to make sure that people have a voice in their elections. And frankly, Steve, I think one of the differences that I've seen over time, as you know, I worked for my predecessor, Peter Barca, starting back when Democrats were in the majority in 2009. one of the differences I've seen is that there are more and more people who represent the extremes of their party, and rather than more of a common sense middle approach where we can work with others. And so that's pretty disappointing. And a lot of that happens because the people that get elected either represent extreme districts that 80% Republican or 80% Democrat, or they represent areas where sort of no matter what they say, as long as they're a Democrat or a Republican, they'll still get elected. And that really isn't the way it should be. It should be that we're held accountable by our voters, that we have to go out and work hard and show them that we're working hard for them and that we care about them and that we want to make sure that they succeed. And so I think that fair maps will help do that.
As more and more states around Wisconsin legalize medical and recreational marijuana, what's your position?
So I think most people would agree medical marijuana makes perfect sense. We don't really want to, when it comes to something like that, we don't really want to get in between a doctor and a patient. That's certainly something that they should be able to be prescribed safely. I think the most successful model for getting to recreational marijuana is for us to do medical marijuana first and then see how that goes and see if there's infrastructure there and make sure that we're doing it responsibly. But I'll also say, as a prosecutor, one of the things that I think we need to invest in, and I introduced a bill for this last year, is increasing the amount of police officers who have drug recognition expertise. That's a specific kind of training that helps them spot people who are driving while drugged, which is an increasing problem in Wisconsin. And so it's unfortunately been a vastly underfunded operation for a long time. And so it doesn't take much to double the funds. I'll say that. I think they currently receive about $65,000 in our state budget. But doubling the funds or even tripling it would be pretty affordable for the state. But it would also allow us to make sure that as we legalize marijuana, whether it be medical or recreational, that we're ensuring that our streets remain safe. As you know, drunk driving has long been a problem in Wisconsin, and we want to make sure that it isn't a problem for marijuana.
Wisconsin is a high property tax state, which is why for more than 20 years, school districts, local governments have lived with caps and limits on what they can levy in property taxes. If you're reelected voting on the next state budget, should those caps and limits stay in place?
So I think that the determinations on how local governments should finance themselves really should come from them as a general rule. I think that they should have the opportunity of pitching to their community why they need to be able to change their revenue model in different ways. And to see if their community supports that. So I think I would prefer to see that go through local government. That said, and I anticipate we're going to talk about this soon, I also believe that we should be permitting them, with the community support, to look at other revenue options. Because I'll say this, I'm not really particularly a big fan of the property tax. Obviously, it's necessary and it's one of the few tools that local governments have. But it also, my top priority in the legislature has been to help working families build economic security. And one of the ways that they do that is by buying a house. That's a way that people can spend money every month and have an asset, have something that they can borrow against, have something that they have for the future, and really build up their wealth that way. And so property taxes ultimately make it a little bit less affordable to be able to afford a home. And we really don't want to see that. That's one of the reasons why I supported and co-sponsored closing the dark store loophole last session. There have been estimations that actually here in Kenosha County in Pleasant Prairie would reduce property taxes by $800 for some homes. And so it's shocking, right? I wouldn't have expected that.
That's
either.
A large number.
Yeah, it is. And so we want to make sure that we're finding those creative ways of keeping people's property taxes low so that they can afford a home and they can build wealth over time and they and their family can have economic security. So I'm always sort of open to creative options that we can allow local governments to use to maybe diversify. But I also think that, any opportunities we have to keep property taxes low would be good.
So you're a fan of Rep. Goyke's bill that if a referendum passed in Milwaukee, the city could levy a half-cent sales tax?
I think the referendum is a key component of that. That would have to be supported by the people in the community.
Where are you on the gas tax since the governor recommended last year raising it to stabilize how we pay for highways and bridges? Could you vote for a gas tax increase?
I'll say, so I've always thought that the best models for raising revenue for transportation, and let's be frank, the reason that he has to do that he has to propose something like that, is that we have had pretty unsustainable levels of bonding on transportation. And it's discouraging to see how much debt we've accrued. And we certainly have to make sure that we're able to pay for new projects and that we're also able to hopefully pay down that debt at some point. But I think that one of the ways that we should be approaching that is through usage, right? The people that use the roads should be able to contribute. And the gas tax is one of the ways that we can do that. It's not the only way, though. There are others. There are mileage-based registration fees. There are weight-related fees that would help address, some of the damage that some folks do to the road. So I think there are a number of creative ways that we could raise revenue. I think that indexing the gas tax is probably a pretty common sense measure that most people would agree with to start with.
If schools or local governments plan a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
Absolutely. One of the bills that I authored last year was the Buy American bill. I believe that when government is spending money, I would vastly prefer that it goes to our businesses and our workers, that we're investing in our communities. And so I think that for public works projects, it makes perfect sense for me, for us to be investing in Wisconsin companies, Wisconsin workers.
Let's circle back to Kenosha after the unfortunate incidents with the damage to the property. Didn't Mayor John Antaramian, didn't he say we need $30 million? Can you help me understand, was that a ask from the state or from a number of sources?
I think that was an ask from a number of sources.
Okay.
But I, to be honest, I'll have to double check and ensure that I'm representing his request accurately. I know that the governor has put in, some funds, about $4 million for our small businesses in Kenosha. But yes. I think that we're absolutely going to continue to request funds, and that we're going to continue to want to have ways of rebuilding Kenosha and making sure that our businesses are succeeding, our public infrastructure is being rebuilt, and that we're investing in the city to make sure that it can move past this.
Okay, thanks for help clarify that. Last question, differences between you and your opponent 2 weeks from today, November 3?
Well, I'm not going to go into discussing my opponent, Steve. I'm just going to talk about my record here today. So I'll say, like I said before, helping working families succeed has been my top priority in the legislature. It is my top priority. I think that starts with safe and healthy neighborhoods. Right now, we are going through a tremendous pandemic. We need to be responding to that with science and with a comprehensive approach to deal with that. I also think that we need to be creating a healthy atmosphere for our students and teachers to be able to succeed. I know one of the big challenges is making sure that our schools have the resources they need to ensure all of our kids are safe. But we also need to make sure that we have a strong economy. So we need to be investing in our small businesses. Like I mentioned earlier, I support legislation, and I wrote legislation that would make sure that state government was buying services from our businesses and from our workers. I think that's absolutely important. But I also think that we need to be working closely with our small business community. And like I said earlier, I work closely with our chamber here in Kenosha and with many different small businesses to ensure that they know what resources are available to them as we're going through what has been an insanely difficult time for them. And then lastly, we talked a little bit about this as well, but I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to build wealth and that they have the opportunity to sort of move up the economic ladder. And one of the key components of that is homeownership. So this past session, I co-sponsored a bill that would allow families to save up to a certain portion in tax-free funds to be able to be put towards buying their first home, because that first home is a big challenge for many people, and especially that down payment. But on top of that, we also discussed the dark store loophole, where we're hoping to close that so that more working families and small businesses can have reduced property tax burdens. So I think there's a number of ways that we can do that so that we can help working people move forward and be able to move up the economic ladder. And that's going to be my top priority again this next session.
Thank you. State Representative Tip McGuire, there, I got it right that time, from Kenosha, is a Democrat seeking re-election in the 64th Assembly District. Tip, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Always good to chat with you, Steve.
Thanks. Stay safe. Thank you.
You too.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.